The summer of 2025 brought anxiety, not celebration, to Canada. Instead of the usual festivals and outdoor gatherings, a heavy sense of unease settled over the country. People gathered in public spaces, not for joy, but to share their worries and watch the news unfold, searching for answers that never seemed to come. The United States, under Trump's America First policy, imposed a sudden 35% tariff on all Canadian goods, a devastating blow to the economy. The announcement sent shockwaves through every sector, from manufacturing to agriculture, and left Canadian exporters reeling as trucks lined up at the border unable to cross. The shock was immediate. From Toronto's financial core to small-town Maritimes, disbelief turned to fear as the economic fallout became real. Families and business owners watched in disbelief as their livelihoods were threatened overnight, and the sense of security Canadians once felt began to unravel. Factories shuttered, news broadcasts showed grim forecasts, and the once casual cross-border trade ground to a halt. The ripple effects were felt everywhere. Supply chains broke down, shelves emptied, and workers faced sudden layoffs. The sense of stability that defined Canadian life vanished, replaced by uncertainty and a feeling of betrayal. Families gathered around kitchen tables, anxiously discussing how to make ends meet, while small business owners faced the heartbreaking decision to close their doors. The special relationship with the U.S. evaporated overnight. The tariff felt like a hostile act, not just protectionism. Decades of trust and cooperation seemed to dissolve in an instant, leaving Canadians questioning their place in North America. The world's longest undefended border now felt like an economic iron curtain. What was once a symbol of friendship and open exchange became a stark reminder of division and uncertainty. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government was blindsided, scrambling for answers as the Canadian dollar plummeted and inflation soared. The government's emergency meetings offered little comfort as prices rose and savings evaporated. Diplomatic efforts failed, the U.S. rebuffed all negotiations, hopes for a quick resolution faded as talks broke down and officials returned home empty-handed. The crisis escalated into a national emergency, with Canadians looking desperately to their leaders for a way out. Protests erupted in major cities, and unemployment lines grew longer by the day. The summer of discontent had only just begun, and the nation braced itself for what would come next. The trade war's impact was swift and brutal. In Ontario and Quebec, factories that had powered towns for generations fell silent as U.S. orders vanished. Thousands lost jobs overnight, entire communities faced collapse. In British Columbia, sawmills shut down, lumber piled up, and the timber trade ground to a halt. Prairie farmers, cut off from their main market, watched crops rot and faced financial ruin. Small businesses, reliant on cross-border trade, closed their doors as supply chains broke down. Unemployment soared, social services strained, and rural towns teetered on the brink. The intricate web of commerce with the U.S. unraveled, leaving mounting debts and foreclosed homes. The Canadian dream was turning into a nightmare for many. This was no distant political squabble. It was a direct assault on ordinary Canadians' livelihoods. Economic insecurity became a new, harsh reality. The nation's pain was personal, visible, and growing. The U.S.-Canada border, once a symbol of partnership and seamless cooperation, was suddenly transformed by a wave of tariffs and trade restrictions. Overnight, it became a hard economic barrier. Integrated supply chains that had taken decades to build collapsed in a matter of days. A single car part could no longer cross the border multiple times, disrupting the rhythm of North American manufacturing. Border communities like Windsor and Detroit, once fluid and interconnected, suddenly found themselves divided by uncertainty. They now faced endless delays, canceled contracts, and a sense of economic paralysis that rippled through every sector. Trucking companies struggled with crippling fees and new paperwork, their drivers left waiting for hours or even days. Warehouses filled up with unsent goods, and the uncertainty left both workers and business owners anxious about the future. The trust that had defined the relationship for generations was gone, replaced by a growing sense of suspicion and resentment. Border security tightened, and protests erupted as frustration mounted on both sides. Canadian politicians shifted from diplomacy to crisis management, scrambling to protect jobs and industries at risk. For the first time in decades, they began to view the U.S. as an adversary rather than a partner. The alliance that had lasted a century was fundamentally broken, its foundations shaken to the core. For ordinary Canadians, the U.S. now felt distant and even hostile, a neighbor transformed into a stranger. Cross-border trips became fraught with tension and anxiety. Families hesitated, unsure of what welcome awaited them. The sense of shared destiny that once united these two nations seemed to evaporate almost overnight. Canadians were forced to see themselves as isolated, cut off from the continental economy they once helped build. The border, once a line of connection, now marked a deep divide. The border's transformation triggered a national identity crisis, forcing Canadians to reconsider their place in the world. The question loomed, what did it mean to be Canadian now, in a world where old alliances could vanish so quickly? In Ottawa, Prime Minister Carney's government scrambled for solutions. Emergency aid packages offered only temporary relief as the crisis deepened. The U.S. dependency, once a strength, was now a glaring vulnerability. Policymakers urgently debated alternatives, retaliatory tariffs, new trade deals, or a bold pivot. Diversification, long discussed, became an urgent necessity. Building new trade ties with Europe or the Pacific would take years. Canada needed something faster. A radical idea emerged, turning to the rising powers of the global South. In a televised address, Carney signaled a paradigm shift. Canada would no longer let its prosperity be hostage to U.S. whims. The implication was clear. Joining the BRICS Bloc was on the table. The nation braced for a move that could redefine its future. The search for a lifeline was leading Canada into uncharted territory. The stakes had never been higher. As Canada reeled from economic uncertainty and shifting alliances, BRICS was quietly but steadily rising on the global stage. Once a loose coalition, BRICS, now including Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and new members like Saudi Arabia and Egypt, had transformed into a formidable bloc with growing influence. Together, these nations represent over 40% of the world's population and nearly half of global GDP. Their combined economic and political power directly challenged the Western-led order that had dominated for decades. The bloc's new development bank emerged as a rival to the IMF and World Bank, offering loans in local currencies and pushing to de-dollarize international trade, giving member countries more control over their economies. As U.S. protectionism grew, BRICS became even more attractive. Over 30 nations, frustrated with Western dominance, expressed interest in joining the group, hoping for a fairer global system. For Canada, BRICS offered access to vast new markets, fresh investment opportunities, and a potential escape from over-reliance on the U.S. economy. The bloc promised economic sovereignty, a chance to diversify trade, and a future less tied to Washington's shifting policies and unpredictable whims. But joining BRICS meant embracing a new world order, one increasingly led by the East and South, not the traditional powers of the West. The choice facing Canada was stark: cling to old alliances and familiar systems, or leap into a new uncertain future with emerging powers. For Canada, BRICS was both a potential lifeline and a leap into the unknown. The world was watching and the stakes had never been higher. The idea of joining BRICS ignited a fierce national debate. Supporters led by Carney argued it was economic survival, not abandonment of Western values. Manufacturers, farmers, and business leaders saw new markets and overdue diversification. They insisted, "We're not choosing new friends, just new customers." Critics, including opposition politicians and human rights advocates, warned of aligning with authoritarian regimes. They feared betraying Canada's democratic values and damaging ties with Western allies. Some argued Canada would simply swap U.S. dependency for Chinese or Russian influence. The risk of U.S. retaliation loomed large. Would Washington tolerate its neighbor joining a rival bloc? The debate split families and communities, dominating headlines and parliament. It was about more than trade, it was about Canada's soul. Would the nation prioritize prosperity or principles? The choice would define Canada for a generation. The country stood at a crossroads. Joining BRICS promised immediate relief and long-term diversification. Canadian businesses could access billions of new customers. Sawmills and farmers envisioned booming exports. The new development bank offered funding, potentially in Canadian dollars, insulating the economy from U.S. shocks. But the risks were immense. The U.S. could retaliate with harsher measures, border restrictions, sanctions, or security cutoffs. Canada risked being caught between two superpowers, its sovereignty and the balance. Aligning with BRICS meant partnering with non-democratic regimes, risking Canada's moral standing. In a bloc dominated by China, Canada could become a junior partner, its interests sidelined. BRICS markets were vast but complex, with legal and cultural hurdles. The dream of seamless trade could become a bureaucratic nightmare. The choice was high risk, high reward: escape the crisis, or lose Canada's economic and democratic identity. The stakes were nothing less than the nation's future. The gamble was real. The BRICS debate forced Canadians to confront their identity and values. For 150 years, Canada defined itself through ties to Britain and partnership with the US, a Western democratic nation. The BRICS proposal challenged every pillar of that identity. One path: patch up US relations, endure hardship, and reaffirm Western alliances. The other: pivot to BRICS, declare independence from American influence, and embrace a multipolar world. The first offered safety but no quick fix. The second, autonomy but moral compromise. The choice was about more than trade. It was about what kind of country Canada wanted to be. Would it remain a steadfast Western democracy or forge a new, independent path? The decision would shape Canada's economy, foreign policy, and sense of self for decades. For every Canadian, this was a defining crossroads. The moment of truth had arrived.